Khan's behavior reflects his assurances of superiority, and it's the truly infuriating kind because it comes from truth. The man is smarter, stronger, healthier than you and I could ever be. One bit that I reflected on, though, is a question. Can one argue that Khan and his comrades are, in fact, more evolved, given his way of addressing Kirk? I mean, physically he has, but he is then viewed as a villain. Yet isn't this often the attitude portrayed throughout early TNG, that our crew is much more evolved than people today, not physically, but culturally, and similarly look down on others? Where, in the end, is the real difference between Khan pointing out the undeniable truth that he is mentally and physically superior to Kirk, and Riker stating the 20th century people are so lacking in redeeming qualities that it's a wonder they haven't killed themselves? Anyway, we'll be seeing Khan very soon in our continuing look at the Star Trek films.
It's so useless!
Ready to roll out!
This week's episode opens in Quarks as everyone is toasting the man of the hour, Lieutenant New Guy. He had piloted the Defiant through a major battle and emerged victorious, and it's always nice to try to celebrate. This week's episode opens in Quarks. Celebrate the lower decks characters. Bashir and O'Brien in particular embrace the young man.
And if there's anything you want, anything at all, just ask.
Well, there is one thing.
Name it.
Next time you two go to the holosuite, I'd like to come along.
Sorry. Calm me down.
That's out of the
It's
question.
impossible.
Who do you think you are, Vic Fontaine? Keep this up, kid, and you'll be either demoted to extra or shot. I can't help but wonder if this guy is supposed to be a thinly veiled Harry Kim. Gold shirt, not long from the academy, eager to please and anxious for any recognition. The only real difference is that this guy's 22 and a lieutenant, whereas Harry will still be an ensign when he's pushing 30. But otherwise, couldn't you see Harry sitting there, continuing to try to milk his one success long past everyone else has gone home, to try to pretend his life's not empty and meaningless? The only real difference is with the party over, our young friend seems to be drunk. Now, that's what happens when you're drinking what Esri says is brandy out of a big gulp cup.
He won't be the first drunken ensign I've escorted home.
Esri, he's a lieutenant. Guess you had some of that brandy too. He's not the first drunken ensign I've taken home and shown how desperate I am for emotional validation. Despite this, she manages to resist his clumsy advances and heads to bed. O'Brien in particular embraced the young.
Can't be done. Outside the question. It's impossible.
Who do you think you are, Vic Fontaine? Pleased and anxious for any recognition. The only real difference is that this guy's 22 and a lieutenant to try to pretend his life's not empty and meaningless. The only real difference, he's a lieutenant of that brandy too. O'Brien in particular embraced the only to awaken to a flurry of activity outside her door. Someone's murdered Lieutenant Harry Ensign. What's his name? The odd thing about the murder, besides the fact that for once it wasn't done by some alien sucking out his salt or life force or whatever, is the weapon used. He was shot with a titanium bullet, and Cisco immediately thinks of the TR-116. Because if there's a badass way of killing somebody, Cisco knows it right off the top of his head. The TR-116 was Starfleet's only slug thrower, created to work in energy-dampening environments, but abandoned because, well, it actually worked. However, the replication pattern still exists for it, though only a Starfleet officer could access it. What's weirder is that the bullet only traveled a short distance, yet there are no powder burns on the victim. And weirdest of all is why anyone would even want him dead when he's only just arrived 10 days ago and spent most of that time on patrol on the Defiant.
As far as I could tell, he was intelligent, dedicated, eager to please. Everyone liked him.
Like I said, he scores 3 out of 4 on the Harry Kim scale. Everything but the last one. And this event further emphasizes it. O'Brien and Bashir sit and lament not letting him come to the holosuite with them now that he's dead. When Harry dies, he's lucky if people are willing to step over his body rather than just walk on it. As Ezri spends time with the remains, Bashir comes to check on her. It's a real credit to how he has developed that he came in like an obnoxious weenie and now comes across as a seasoned authority figure as he tries to comfort Ezri. She's bothered because rather than the kind of combat deaths she's witnessed, this is an act of cold-blooded murder, something she has special insight into thanks to memories from a previous host, Joran Dax. His existence was revealed in Season 3, and back then he was a troubled musician who eventually murdered his doctor to stop from losing his host. Well, that was so Season 3, because now he's a serial killer with 3 victims. Unlike Bashir's development, things like this feel less like a story and more like he's an RPG character. You're going to choose the class specialization. You can follow the musician path or the killer path. You've chosen killer. You now have 3 victims. Congratulations. Pick something from the feat table. On the way back, Ezri discovers Odo with a murder suspect, but it's Lieutenant Dead Guy, and now our hands are stained with blood. Yeah, sometimes this stuff can be effective symbolism, but honestly, the way it's executed here, I practically wanted to roll my eyes at this point. It just felt like it was trying too hard. Joran then shows up, and things start to pick up a little bit. He offers his help to Ezri, but she's resisting. Thing is, and not that I'm taking sides in this debate, but I am being honest here, Ezri has often seemed emotionally weaker than Jadzia, so this is something he could potentially prey upon. Ezri awakens in a start, and before she can go back to sleep, Cisco lets her know there's been another murder. Sleep tight! He's called Ezri down because he wants her to use forensic psychology to determine who the murderer is. First, this is criminal psychology, not forensic psychology. Second, profiling isn't terribly reliable. In fact, just a couple years earlier than this episode had broadcast, it had sadly been shown to actually be dangerous, such as in the case of Richard.
Systems online in 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Jewel. If you're too young to remember it, Jewel found a bomb at the Olympic Stadium in Atlanta and helped save the day. But after just a short while of being a hero, profiling done by criminal psychologists declared him a likely suspect to plant the bomb. And the FBI was nice enough to leak this to the media, who then promptly shat all over him. And guess what? He was totally innocent. And the real guy, nothing like the profile. So not only were they looking at the wrong guy, they had stopped looking for the right guy. Great. But in TV land, of course, this stuff is better than psychics, because you can act like it's Sherlock Holmes-type brilliance and not plucking things from the cosmos ass. On the opposite end of failure is genetically engineered Superman Bashir and brilliant engineer O'Brien, who put their heads together to try to find the answer, as you can see here.
Nice melon.
Lita hears something similar several times a day. The chief lets them know to put on the goggles. Yeah, you too, Odo. You better protect your eyes there. O'Brien fires the bullet through the wall and into the melon by putting a tiny transporter on the end of the gun, and using the special super X-ray targeting yellow thingy, he could see right through the wall at what he was aiming. Odo compliments the chief on his weapon. Shut up. And it is admittedly an intriguing weapon. You have what looks like a nice, strong, lightweight weapon, so clearly some advanced materials making it up. Titanium slugs with advanced chemical propellant, a targeting system that can see through any obstacle and fully integrated with controls within the weapon casing, and a transporter capable of instantaneous and practically untraceable relocation of the bullet without loss of momentum and integrated to the targeting system so as to know exactly where to put it. And all that science and technology used to achieve the same thing the first projectiles did: throw something fast enough at a person to kill them. It's like a mushroom cloud, beautiful and terrible at the same time. Ezri has decided to wander the promenade alone at night because, hey, it's a murder mystery, what else is she going to do? Worf catches her there and admonishes her. The two have a complicated relationship because Trill tradition says that a new host shouldn't maintain romantic relationships from previous hosts, and as Jadzia's husband, that would apply. Seems like Worf wants and doesn't want a relationship, so he's just going to settle for stalking for right now. But he reasonably suggests she stops wandering around like this, doing stupid and dangerous things, and then unwittingly talks her into seeking advice from a serial killer. Now, we've prepared the cream tomato sauce earlier today, which will always complement your phantom murderer. We recommend a strong burgundy to accompany the ritual, as its flavor and texture will enhance the sauce, and it will leave you drunk enough to actually think this is a good idea. Duran appears to her now as an intangible Hannibal Lecter, and first order of business is to go check out the weapon. Presumably the chief has put it here in this case so that Dax and Odo could check it out if they needed it for their investigations. Because all the equipment's right there to start your own little killing spree if you're evil. Lucky thing Dax doesn't have a psychopath whispering in her ear. After putting on the eyepiece and grabbing the gun, we start to see in killer vision. You know, I assumed the targeting sensor would create some kind of wireframe outline of people and things, or at least some kind of distorted effect, but it seems this thing is just out-and-out X-ray vision. I can think of a dozen uses for this thing before even moving into the obvious use by perverts. Don't be surprised if we never see it again. Duran asks how it feels to put someone in her sights, and from that deduce the killer's background and motives. Someone cool and calculating like a scientist. Perhaps. And there's just one little fly in this ointment. It assumes the killer isn't a deranged individual who believes he or she has become God and wants to metaphorically cast down thunderbolts, or believes that the gun is now an extension of his penis and shows strength and virility. Because the thing about a crazy serial killer isn't the killer part, it's the crazy part. And the thing about a lot of crazy people, and believe me, I'm speaking from experience here, is that they do not behave rationally. They're sometimes so irrational they can't be reasoned with. Duran pushes Ezri to pull the trigger once she has a target in her sights, but she finally refuses. Duran then points out the gun isn't even loaded. It was just a chance to feel what it would be like to pull the trigger. Plus it helps show how he's got Ezri wrapped around his little finger. Of the ideas you've had so far this season, Ezri, manifesting a serial killer doesn't seem to be amongst your best. And that's not a terribly large and spectacular sampling to be among either. For instance, while brooding in Quarks, security chases a suspect through the place, and when Ezri tries to stop him and gets punched, she's ready to stab the guy while Joran eggs her on. Then again, this may be like the empty gun trick. Look at those tiny little arms. Ezri would have trouble stabbing Jello on the first try. Sisko calls her into his office to read her the riot act over damn near killing someone in a bar fight. Turns out he wasn't even guilty either. He had access to specs without permission, but only because he's a gun collector. And he's completely cleared because one of the killings took place when he was on Bajor. I mean, even this gun isn't that good. This incident has pushed Ezri far enough, so she tries putting Joran back in her belly, but is interrupted by Odo. There's another murder. This leads to Joran spotting a clue, the laughing Bolian in the picture, which Ezri realizes is the common element: laughing pictures.
A killer who hates laughter.
My God, we all know who the enemy of joy and laughter is. It's Rick Berman! He's the killer! They conclude that the killer is actually a Vulcan. This fact pisses off some people who feel DS9 had it in for Vulcans. There were no Vulcan regulars or recurring guest stars, and with Take Me Out to the Holosuite, instead of the audience siding with Sisko against a Vulcan bully, it came across to some as the show stacking the story against the Vulcans. So when the killer's revealed to be a Vulcan, it came across as more of the same, more picking on the Vulcans. Well, while I sympathize with concerns over diminishing the classic alien races of Star Trek, I don't think it was the intent. Robert Hewitt Wolf, who had left the show at the end of Season 5, wrote this episode, making substantial changes to what Ira Steven Barrett suggested, and it was he who decided on the Vulcan as the killer. Not to show something is wrong with the Vulcans, but to show something wrong with the war. The war is taking such a toll that it can drive even a Vulcan mad. So they start looking through Vulcan suspects to try to find him. After all, they can't expect him to just waltz into the turbo lift with them and... Okay, well, he's not actually waltzing. His record fits the profile, but rather than telling Odo, they decide to handle it themselves. After all, why waste time dragging in trained security experts and investigators when you've got an 80-pound psychiatrist and her imaginary friend on the case?
We need proof. Something I can take to Odo.
What? You're the criminal psychologist in this, not the detective. Tell people who are the experts so they can find the proof and do it within the bounds of the law, as opposed to you thinking that spying on someone in their quarters without a warrant or probable cause is in any way going to hold up in court. Even Starfleet's justice system can't be that distorted that you could violate expectations of privacy just because an intangible dead guy said it was okay. Now you've given him enough time to arm himself, so you have to shoot him. Good work. You just keep screwing this up, Ezri. You're not even calling in the medical team or security. You're going to go down there yourself, knowing that even wounded, this guy has 3 times the strength of the average human and knows the infield fly rule. This is all to allow Joran one last chance to try to get Ezri to be a killer, so she can refuse it. And I know this upsets some, but I do like the killer's reasons in all this.
Tell me, why did you do it?
Because logic demanded it.
With this one line, he makes me wish so much more of this episode could have been devoted to him. This is what happens when a Vulcan mind breaks. Even when he behaves in insane ways, he cannot stop believing that it is logical. As if there was some little voice telling him it was all right, that it all made sense, that somehow the killing and the deaths of over 1,200 of his former shipmates, they all tie together in a pattern that, when viewed the right way, could all be seen as something logical. Almost like someone getting pushed into doing things that make no sense would argue that it was the only way to find a murderer, huh? Well, everything's resolved, although this is one case I would have loved to have seen in court. No, I didn't contact security or anyone when I had my suspicions. I'm aware of the regulations, but it was obvious to me this man needed to be shot. I mean, I was just trying to understand how killers think. Look, I took the advice of a dead serial killer that nobody else could see or hear. No, don't be silly. Of course he's not here now. He's gone back to living in my tummy where he belongs. What are you doing? I'm not the crazy one. I'm not the crazy one! The post-episode follow-up. Annoying character goes to the dead bullion in the picture. I have no idea what it is exactly, but something about his laugh is horrifying. Final score for Field of Fire is 5 out of 10. Ezri didn't get too many chances to carry the whole episode, but of those she did, this one is probably the best, at least as far as being focused on her character goes. The character conflict between her and Joran harkened back to the early days of the show, when characters didn't always get along with each other, yet had to work with each other. The mystery is questionable once it shifts from a standard detective story into the Ezri story, but as a chance to explore her, it works much better. You know, with the lightweight barrels that deflect weapons fire, the see-through targeting eyepieces, compact air storage capacity, and super advanced electronic technology, it's a wonder the Federation doesn't have the most kick-ass full-body combat armor in Star Trek. Combine that with a gun that could fire through walls. How the hell were they ever losing this war?
How could anyone be so happy with such unattractive children?
We open in the Hollow Suite in Vic Fontaine's place. Vic is a recreation of a classic Vegas show with the twist that he was designed to be sentient. Being DS9, Vic doesn't bother pulling a Moriarty. He just takes it all in stride. Hey, I'm a hologram. Another round for my friends. I've got the world on a string. He's rejecting Rom's singing act and then giving Bashir some recordings of classic songs for the soldiers on the front lines. Cisco's up in his office reading over the names of the latest casualties before heading off to deliver supplies to AR-558. If you didn't notice in the title sequence, 558 is the production number for this episode, even though it may say otherwise in the DVDs. So the Defiant heads off to the front lines. This being a war episode, let's talk a moment about the Defiant. It was picked up by Cisco for this work and actually constructed under his supervision. That should be no surprise, really, and if it is, well, let me put it in perspective for you. Picard faced the Borg, and after it was done ruining his life, he stood in his office and drank Earl Grey. Cisco faced the Borg, and after it was done ruining his life, he fumed at it from an escape pod, then went off to design a ship whose only purpose is to kill Borg. It's a set of guns strapped to an engine. Then he called it Defiant, a name that practically shakes its fist at the Borg, and that was his second choice. Starfleet felt that the USS Ben Sisko's motherfucking pimp hand was just too long. Even the bridge layout shows it, just him in the center, with a good view of anything he might want to blow to hell, which is, well, anything in his vision that affronts him, really. You can see the design everywhere. I want a bridge like Kirk. Well, we've got this design for the upcoming Voyager. Yeah, find whoever designed that bridge and bring him up here so I can give him a Class 2 Starfleet bitch slap for that design. The captain looked like she's sitting on a bench of the student union, for God's sakes. She'll have to stand up every time something happens just so people will take her seriously. Okay, but the Enterprise is nice and relaxing. Do you not get that this is a warship? I'm in here to kill Borg. That's my idea of relaxing. Put the first officer somewhere where they can work for a living. If I want their advice, I don't need to be close enough to hold their hand to get it. And the counselor doesn't come on the bridge unless she knows how to blow shit up too. And even then, put her somewhere where she's going to work for a living. If she's going to be 2 feet away from me all the time, it's only to make it easier for her to give me a lap dance while I'm killing some Borg. Oh, and somebody give this thing a cloaking device too. I'm going to surprise those bastards. We can't do that. We don't have one. And if we did, the Romulans wouldn't approve. Oh, well, give me a moment to go and do a little negotiating with the Romulan ambassador. Hey, ambassador motherfucker, I need a favor. The cloaking device will be here tomorrow. Now, if you'll excuse me, Starfleet's about to award the Christopher Pike Medal to my dick. Quark has been brought along because the Grand Nagus wants to know what's going on, but he just gets in the way by coming up to the bridge while they're fighting the Jem'Hadar. They quickly dispatch him, though, and Cisco shoos him off and gets back to his chair.
Nog, your uncle's just a little nervous.
Back to the panel or start dancing, bitch! Oh yeah, Ezri. Jadzia died at the end of last season, and the Dax symbiont was put in her to stop it from dying. Unlike Jadzia, she wasn't one of those super whopper trills that only gets one of the few symbionts, so she's a bit uncomfortable about the whole thing. They beam down and get ambushed, but by the Federation forces. They're suffering serious shell shock, under constant attack by the Dominion for 5 months. And worse, there are special mines that randomly move in and out of subspace, blowing you away even if you've walked up the same corridor 100 times. I have to give particular props over the casting of Raymond Cruz as Vargas. The part I remember him most for was Chavez in Clear and Present Danger, and his number of smaller military roles in the years following, like Alien Resurrection or The Rock. The fact that he is the one that we see here close to cracking up adds that extra subconscious nudge to the horror of the situation. The theme for this episode is War Sucks. Well, that may be obvious, but it shows you point blank. You see people on the emotional cusp, stuck in a place nobody would ever go voluntarily because of this thing, a Dominion communication hub. It can potentially be used to figure out how to eavesdrop on the Dominion. And that's it. People are suffering and dying in a place so remote and irrelevant it doesn't even have a name, because of something that might help them later on. Top that off with the knowledge that in a previous episode, Dr. Bashir and a group of super genius freaks calculated that the war would almost certainly end with defeat and the loss of 900 billion lives, and Cisco vehemently refused surrender. And here he is, watching some of those 900 billion dying firsthand for a thing which might help give them an edge in a war the experts say that they can't win. Damn, this is just getting depressing. Here's a picture of Scooter as the leader of a banana republic. Nog, however, being fresh from the academy, looks upon them all with awe. Reese, played by the self-destructively named Patrick Kilpatrick, has a necklace of Cutracell white tubes he's taken from the Jem'Hadar, and later we see he has a knife that's not standard issue that he spends a lot of time sharpening. Nog idolizes him, but Reese has no interest in being worshipped. Quark is frightened by the sight of him, and the rest, warning Nog that this is not the Starfleet he knows out here, that humans are fine, so long as their bellies are full, but strand them in a hellhole with no sleep and they'll become nasty. That's something that might again offend those who hold to the idealized future, but it does also make sense. If humanity has indeed evolved, it is environmentally imposed and not genetic, so the old instincts that existed to keep us alive would not have been magically removed, but are kept in line through self-control and circumstance. Self-control is definitely strained, as Vargas nearly shoots Bashir for messing with a bandage that a fallen comrade had put on him.
He was a jerk. I couldn't stand the guy. He wouldn't shut up. Yab. He thought he was the world's greatest authority on everything.
Huh. Sounds like one of my descendants must be joining Starfleet. With all this, and knowing that he can't just get relief troops in, Sisko can't bring himself to leave these people in this situation. And with the arrival of more Jem'Hadar, well, that's too many ships even for the USS Ben Sisko's motherfucking pib hand. So he just orders them not to beam him up, but just leaves so that he can hold his position. Quark is obviously less than thrilled, observing to Nog that the Ferengi would have avoided a war by negotiation rather than becoming violent, and chastising him for not behaving like a Ferengi, clutching a weapon instead of looking to avoid a fight. Nog just continues to idolize them all, though, not fully aware that the only medal they're likely to receive is the Congressional Medal of Fucked. Nog is soon sent out with Larkin and Reese to go scouting, since the jamming stops all signals, but Nog's hearing is very good. They find the Jem'Hadar, but Larkin is killed and Nog is shot in the leg, and it has to be amputated. Still, nothing can get in the way of Nog's good mood. So long as he has Sisko's approval, a little thing like losing a leg isn't bothering him now. We'll see things are a bit different in It's Only a Paper Moon. Damn, this is just getting depressing again. Here's a picture of Keanu Reeves. Meanwhile, Ezri has been working with engineer Kellen, played by Bill Mumy, whom you might know from The Twilight Zone, Lost in Space, The Twilight Zone movie, Babylon 5, and The New Twilight Zone. They managed to find all of the mines and move them to a choke point to thin the Jem'Hadar numbers, much to Ezri's disgust that they are reduced to using weapons like this, though pragmatism wins over everyone else. When this request came in, mention was made of the tactics involved. Unfortunately, the closest I've been to military training is playing football and beating Mass Effect 2 on Insanity, so I am talking out of my ass here. But it does seem even to me that they're not just understaffed, but under-equipped. It seems like if they're in a cave, they could just collapse the entrance tunnels, or cover it with heavy weapons, or one of those fancy force fields. All they've got are the Lego phaser rifles and the music of Vic Fontaine. The Jem'Hadar are likewise equipped only with standard weapons. Maybe they can't damage the relay, who knows, but they come charging in to get shot, taking out Vargas and Kellen and wounding Bashir. One of the jokes about the Ferengi's application is that they represent aspects of modern human beings, usually taking the form of greed, sexism, duplicity. In this case, whether intentionally or not, they have subtly but ingeniously written this so that the Ferengi represent the idealized federation that some people champion. We don't fight, we don't resort to violence to solve problems, we look for peaceful solutions. We're disgusted by your militarism. And then when someone threatens Quark and Nog directly, Quark screams, picks up a gun, and kills them. Everything he said before against humans is now reflected in his own behavior. He has become, in his own words, as nasty and as violent as the most bloodthirsty Klingon. During the fight, a Jem'Hadar disarms Sisko, but apparently doesn't know just how foolish that is, because it puts him in range of the mighty Sisko fist. So, with another chance to punch someone, he takes it, scoops up the phaser rifle, takes out even more with that, even taking them out by just plain beating them with it. But of course, even the Sisko cannot take out more than a dozen or so genetically engineered super soldiers single-handedly before someone manages a lucky break and hits him from behind, knowing it is the only likely way to stun him. When he comes to, the battle is over, and they have held the line! Replacements are brought in for the survivors, and when they end up back in Sisko's office, another list of casualties arrives. Sisko reflects that it's not just a list of names. No, it's also a list of future Memory Alpha entries. Post-episode follow-up. Annoying character goes to Rom for his ear-shredding singing earlier. Final score for the Siege of AR-558 is 8 out of 10. What pushes the episode up so high is thanks in no small part to director Colby calling on his own Vietnam War experiences to create a real atmosphere of gloom and pointlessness that shows war as it truly is. Particularly effective is a point about halfway through the story where the Jem'Hadar have tricked the good guys into giving away tactical information about their position. Everyone realizes how much worse things are now, and then a mine goes off again. It's just one more thing to remind them that as bad as things are, they are far more screwed than they thought. The 4 guest stars all do a very effective job. Vargas as the soldier pushed past the brink, Larkin as the officer leading in a situation she would never signed up for, Kellen as the engineer trying to stay optimistic while banging his head against the walls, and all of whom we see die. Finally, there's Reese, whom we'll talk a bit more about next week.
You lie! In City Alpha 5 there was life. A fair chance. This is City Alpha 5!
SETI Alpha 6 exploded 6 months after we were left here.
Well, these things do happen, I guess. I'm no geophysicist, I'm just a viewer with an opinion.
It's jungle out there. Poison the very air we breathe. You know what's in the water that you drink? Well, I do. It's amazing. People think I'm crazy, 'cause I worry all the time. You pay attention, you'd be worried too. You better pay attention, all this world we love so much might just kill you. 'Cause there's the jungle out there. There's the jungle out there.
1982 is an amazing year for the science fiction fantasy genre. It gave us E.T., it gave us Blade Runner, it gave us John Carpenter's The Thing, it gave us Poltergeist, it gave us Beastmaster, it gave us Tron. And amidst all that arose the sequel to Star Trek the Motion Picture that would set the standard against which all other Trek films would be measured. A film that came into that market and still broke a box office record for its opening weekend. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, done by 2 men who had never done anything with Star Trek before, had managed to somehow recapture the feelings that came from the original series, of the camaraderie amongst the crew and the sense of adventure. And it brought back the classic series villain of Khan. Who better to go against Kirk, a man who had stared down a supercomputer that can destroy planets if it wants to, than a super strong, super intelligent, enraged egotist? Khan, the yin to Kirk's yang, with his own obsession, vengeance. A lot happened to get the second film done. Harve Bennett was brought in after Gene Roddenberry was kicked upstairs, with television science fiction work under his belt, and most importantly, a reputation for maintaining a budget, an obvious problem for the first film. Harve went back and watched all the episodes of the original series at least once to understand it, and it inspired the direction he wanted to take the film. He wanted to acknowledge that the crew had aged by specifically focusing on Kirk turning 50 and being surrounded by cadets. It was also his idea to follow up to Space Seed, which he felt provided a perfect antagonist in a story that was practically designed for a sequel. With that underway, the biggest challenge was to get Spock into the picture. You see, Nimoy had had a falling out with Paramount and Gene. He really only did the first film to help get a lawsuit against Paramount resolved, and he wasn't interested in doing anything more with it. But when Harve approached him about appearing in the next movie and dying, he was excited. A good death scene, and a way out of a series he believed was going to be like a lot of other film franchises, with each sequel being worse than the last. So Spock was back so long as he was allowed to die. Harve Bennett had all the pieces in place now except one, which would be crucial to the success of this film. That was writer-director Nicholas Meyer. Nick Meyer sifted through all the previous scripts, lifted out all the good stuff that everyone liked, and pushed everything else aside. He didn't approach the film as some potboiler sequel to get out of the way and move on from. He truly worked to craft a story, and his script was originally considered untouchable. However, word got out that Spock would die, rumored to have been leaked by Gene, who was pissed off at this move, and the fans were irate. In response, Spock's death wasn't removed. It was doubled and shifted. That way, rather than shocking everyone and making them wonder who else could die, like it would originally have been intended, it would be a dramatic climax to the film. And to throw everyone off, Spock would likewise die at the beginning of the film, but it'd just be him faking it and kind of diffuse the issue until they were ready for it to come around again. There are many themes we're going to cover throughout this review, and one of the things about looking at a work of art in any medium is spotting details that may or may not be intended to illustrate a point, but can do so nevertheless. Wrath of Khan has many, most notably Moby Dick, which I will refer to soon enough, but also King Lear and Paradise Lost. As we see, all these books occupy space on Khan's small bookshelf, along with the Bible and Dante's Inferno. Paradise Lost, you might recall, was referenced by Khan when Kirk sentenced him, and that there can be thought of as its first real application. Khan and his followers in Space Seed had rebelled and tried to take control of a starship, but for this crime Kirk cast him down from the heavens to his prison. Here we may reign secure, and in my choice, to reign is worth ambition though in hell. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. Anyway, let's get started. After the opening credits, the film announces, in the 23rd century. To my knowledge, this is the only Trek film that makes a point of mentioning this to the audience, which is quite a common fixture of science fiction films, and offers a quiet comfort that you don't have to really understand Star Trek. We'll help you out. So we start to pan across the bridge, and the first thing to note is the change in uniforms. Specifically, we finally have some! There's a look of real professionalism about the crew now that was severely lacking in the original, hereafter referred to as TMP. Some people object to this and the likewise naval emphasis of the film, especially Roddenberry. But if you have naval ranks within a naval hierarchy are on something called a ship, and that ship has weapons and is even now preparing for the possibility of fighting someone, as the Enterprise crew often did or prepared to do in Star Trek, then objecting to it being portrayed as a navy and being military is, well, it's at best being facetious and at worst being childish. If you really insist that it isn't the case, then they need to lose the weapons, and whenever people threaten, just have some woman start hitting a tambourine. Kumbaya, my lord, kumbaya. So, in the captain's chair we have Kirstie Alley. Fat joke, Scientology joke, etc. We're walking, we're walking. She's a Vulcan, Savak, and she's being careful to have her ship avoid the neutral zone, which would be a serious breach of the peace with the Klingons, who have claimed this vast area of space that could probably house both a car and a motorcycle if you parked them real close together. However, somehow a ship called the Kobayashi Maru, named after the associate of the famed Kaiser Soze, has managed to get inside the Red Egg of Doom and is calling for assistance. And to rescue them, the Enterprise would have to fly in. So they do, but it's either a trap or really bad timing, because they get ambushed by 3 Klingon ships flying straight out of the first movie. A nice bit is that they order raising shields, and we see these little lights appear around a ship graphic. It's a good way of getting that point across to the audience, so that later on, when we see those dots disappearing, we know what's happening. Of course, we know what's happening right now, don't we? A major ass-kicking, that's what. The shot's fired and Sulu's console blows up, killing him. There's a stick of dynamite randomly inserted into consoles, you see. It's a little game captains like to play. That's why they don't have their own consoles. More go up, and soon everyone is dead and the bridge is filled with smoke. The irony of all this? There's a no smoking sign on the bridge. I'm not joking. At this, we hear the voice of Kirk, who makes an appearance at the front of the ship. To continue the Paradise Lost theme, if Khan is the one to reign in hell, then Kirk, being the one he had sought to overthrow, is, yep, God. Shatner ego joke, we're walking, we're walking. Turns out that this is all a simulation for trainees, the Kobayashi Maru scenario. Everyone gets up, though Savak is clearly dejected for a Vulcan. She objects to the test on the grounds that there was no possible way to win, just like if she was playing for the '08 Detroit Lions. However, Kirk points out that every captain has to be prepared to face a no-win scenario, and the Kobayashi Maru is now established as one of the film's own themes, that of the no-win scenario.
How we deal with death is at least as important as how we deal with life, wouldn't you say?
As Kirk goes to leave, McCoy asks about putting an experienced crew on board Enterprise, but Kirk remarks that galloping around the galaxy is a job for the young. You see, this is Kirk's 50th birthday, and aging is another theme of the film. Unlike TMP, the film takes the age of our heroes and embraces it, turns it into a strength, because it ties in with the idea of how we deal with aging and how we face death, as in the Kobayashi Maru. For starters, we don't grow a beard like Grizzly Adams, McCoy. Kirk and Spock discuss things briefly, including his present to Kirk, an antique copy of A Tale of Two Cities. Bones' present is practical, albeit less than flattering. A pair of glasses, since Kirk can't down to 75 pounds. He also ties back into the only theme running through all Kirk's films, the need to captain the Enterprise. In TMP, he pushed himself back into position. Now, it's Bones advising him to go back so that he won't fade away. But hanging in the background is his remark about it being a job for the young. And here we meet the Reliant, NCC 1864, which so happens to be the year of Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth, one of the pioneering works in science fiction. With so many literary allusions in the film, I figured it was worth mentioning. Anyway, seems Chekhov has done pretty well for himself, being made first officer under the always awesome Paul Winfield. They're looking for a lifeless planet for Project Genesis and think SETI Alpha 6 might be useful, so they contact Dr. Marcus. Her son has misgivings about working with Starfleet, but if you want to drop a giant planet-altering bomb, it's probably not something you'll be allowed to do without their involvement. Anyway, she says it's okay if that tiny preanimate matter that they think they found can be moved, but that requires going down there to check. And no matter what the era, it's always the job to send the senior-most officers down for simple reconnaissance. So Chekhov and Captain Terrell beam down and wander through the sandstorm to a shelter. Inside they find all manner of evidence that this shelter has been assembled into a kind of home from whatever materials were at hand. We see a bookshelf holding Paradise Lost, Moby Dick, Dante's Inferno, King Lear the Bible, and the real page-turner, Statute Regulating. I don't think even Khan ever got bored enough to finish that one. The sight of a seatbelt with Botany Bay on it makes Chekhov realize where they are, and they rush to leave, but are confronted by the residents. Blow winds and crack your cheeks, rage, blow, you cataracts and hurricanes, spout till you have drenched our steeples. I tax you not, you elements, with unkindness. I never gave you a kingdom, called you children. You owe me no subscription. Unmasking, we find this strange man to not actually be Tony Stark or that, but Khan himself. He approaches and identifies Chekhov, though it's a much-repeated continuity error in that Chekhov wasn't on the show when Space Seed was done. Walter Koenig has said that he believes Chekhov was a lower-ranking officer on board at the time who probably made Khan wait an extraordinarily long time to use the bathroom. I like that. So just picture this. The Enterprise corridor. Khan, the great Superman, standing in the hallway, repeatedly twisting and turning his legs with growing impatience, until finally Chekhov emerges and tells him it seems to be clogged and he needs to find another one on a different deck. This just makes this scene take on a whole new level of menace, doesn't it?
But you... I never forget the face. Mr. Chekhov. Isn't it?
They explain the backstory of Khan and company and how they got exiled here, but also that SETI Alpha 6 just blew up one day. I really have no idea how that just happened. Best guess, Khan took his shirt off, and his genetically enhanced Latin body was just too much for it to take. Anyway, it's all too clear how he holds Kirk responsible for his exile and for never bothering to check up on his colony.
On Earth? 200 years ago, I was a prince.
And of course, what title was bestowed on Satan in Paradise Lost by his followers? That of Prince, of course, which further solidifies Khan's role in this. Darkened so, yet shone above them all the Archangel. But his face, deep scars of thunder had entrenched, and care sat on his faded cheek. But under brows of dauntless courage and considerate pride, waiting revenge. Cruel is I, but cast signs of remorse and passion to behold the fellows of his crime. It's been stated that the film has been based somewhat on Moby Dick, but to be more accurate, it is that Moby Dick serves as an inspiration to our villain within the story. Its site there shows us that Khan has had little else to do but to read his few books and watch his wife and comrades perish here. If you've not read Moby Dick, you probably still know the basics, that a great white whale called Moby Dick bit off the leg of one Captain Ahab, and that Ahab seeks to now kill it in revenge. In the end, his obsession causes him to die and his vessel to be sunk. What you probably don't know is that this is one small part of the overall book, a minor backdrop at most throughout the first 80% of the novel. filled with reflections on whale anatomy, the historical facts and inferences about whales, and Ishmael talking on end about how much he loves to squeeze his hands in pools of sperm. It's probably no coincidence that one entire chapter of the novel is devoted just to Ishmael talking about how much he likes snuggling in bed next to his friend Queequeg, which is Polynesian for Harry Kim. But aside of the fact that Moby Dick is the first American classic disguised as gay action piece, it provides us in Captain Ahab perhaps the most well-known archetype for vengeance in the modern era. Probably all modern instances of someone foolishly obsessed to the point of doom can be traced back to him in some way. So it's no surprise that Khan sees some of Ahab in himself. For throughout most of the book, Ahab's only real sign of caring more about his vengeance than his duty is when he refuses to put into shore to get supplies to repair barrels that are leaking whale oil. Otherwise, there's nothing out of sorts when the captain of a whaling ship hopes to kill a specific whale, when they're out here to kill whales after all, except to his loyal first mate, who would prefer to just get the job done and go home. Outside of that obsession, Ahab seems no worse than any other captain. Certainly better than the one described in the story within a story of the vessel called the Town Ho, whose captain can stop a mutiny in progress if he would only promise not to flog his men, but chooses to be stubborn instead. The significance of three of the great literary works on Khan's shelf, and that we've discussed so far, Moby Dick, King Lear, and Paradise Lost, is that each of them has a main character who could arguably be considered a tragic hero. King Lear, of course, was a strong warrior king who sought to enjoy his retirement, only to be stabbed in the back by his two-faced daughters, which must have reminded Khan what it was like to rise up and achieve so much, only to have it snatched away and be reduced to nothing. Satan, who sought to usurp and become king, finds himself and his followers cast out, leading him to fight for whatever small chances of easing the suffering of him and his people. No doubt reminds Khan of how he was banished here and continually surrounded by loyal followers suffering and dying because of his failed revolt. And like Ahab, Khan knows that every hardship he now suffers stems ultimately from his banishment by Kirk. Every catastrophe a small reminder of that fact. It had not been very long prior to the Pequod sailing from Nantucket that he had been found one night lying prone upon the ground and insensible. By some unknown and seemingly inexplicable, unimaginable casualty, his ivory limb having been so violently displaced that it had stake-wise smitten and all but pierced his groin. Nor was it without extreme difficulty that the agonizing wound was entirely cured. Nor, at the time, had it failed to enter his monomaniac mind that all the anguish of that then present suffering was but the direct issue of a former woe. So the references to Moby Dick throughout the film are by Khan's own doing, for as a character who had been so high to be brought so low, had filled him with thoughts not just of reacquiring power, but of vengeance. It should be noted how Khan has twice fallen, first having lost his position of leadership when the tyrants were overthrown, and then to later and independently been banished here, in Hell, as again shown by Khan's shelf with Dante's Inferno present. But while Khan fumes over Kirk, he pieces together that they came to this world thinking that it was Ceti Alpha 6, and he wants to know why. He picks Chekhov up by the conveniently placed boss me around handle, but still he refuses, so Khan takes out some larvae from the Ceti eel that he keeps as pets, which crawl into your ears and make you suggestible, along with giving the audience the heebie-jeebies. Meanwhile, the Enterprise bridge crew shows up to do an inspection, to see how well the trainees can handle things.
Well, I for one am glad to have you at the helm.
Scotty likes to take this pot all over the place, and then smiles at me as if daring me to say something. The trainees are all waiting for him, bright, shining little bastards. Throughout the scenes that follow, the continued ill-at-ease nature of Kirk is present, as he's surrounded by all these young faces, reminding him of how old he now feels, and at the same time, filling him with nervousness at the thought of such inexperienced people being in control.
For everything, there is a first time, Lieutenant. Don't you agree, Admiral?
She looked like a woman to me. I mean, yes. So Savick gets to take the ship out. Wait, we still haven't installed the radiation suits on board. Never mind, I just hope you don't have any problems in the engine room. Meanwhile, as the scientists on Regular 1 finish up Genesis, someone is tuned in to the All Brainwash channel, where Chekhov is saying that they're going to come to pick up Genesis for testing, and says it was authorized by Kirk. Note the pause, by the way, in Chekhov stating that fact, as if he was trying not to say it. The scientists are all pissed off and go off to vent with a game of Magic the Gathering, when we see that, as expected, the Reliant is now under the command of Kanunian Pex, who can both take Genesis and draw Kirk into a track with a single movement. The scientists, meanwhile, debate the issue.
Starfleet has kept the peace for 100 years. I cannot and will not subscribe to your interpretation of this event.
So, we now know how long it's been since Archer was kicked upstairs to captaining a desk. Meanwhile on Enterprise, Saavik and Kirk share a turbo lift, on which they discuss the Kobayashi Maru scenario, and Kirk evades answering of how he handled the test. After that, they get a message from Carol Marcus asking what the hell's going on, but it's quickly jammed, so Enterprise is sent to go check it out. As the ranking officer, Kirk should take command, but he's leery of taking it from Spock. Spock, of course, doesn't have a problem with it, though the last guy that had Kirk do this to him wound up being demoted and then turned into light beams by a bald robot girl. But of course, just because something happened to the last guy doesn't mean anything's going to happen to Spock in this movie. In fact, Spock's comment could be interpreted as eliminating TMP from continuity.
If I may be so bold, it was a mistake for you to accept promotion. Commanding a starship is your first best destiny.
Since he was already an admiral and commanding the Enterprise, then his promotion wouldn't have knocked him out of the chair a second time, would it? Thin, perhaps, but the reasoning for Threshold being written out of continuity is even thinner, and people want to believe that. Well, probably need to believe that. Spock insists that Kirk take command with the famous exchange.
Logic clearly dictates that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
Meanwhile, Khan is met by Joachim, one of his followers, who suggests that they simply content themselves with their escape and continue their plot to reclaim glory, at which point Khan's motivation becomes transparent. He